Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill, an episode that I'm fired up to get into. Bold predictions for this Michigan program rolling into 2025 from the Michigan fans in the comment section. And Dill, the Michigan fans always be bringing the heat, especially going into 2025. A lot of hot takes about Bryce Underwood, a lot of hot takes about this team making a run in the college football playoffs, all of which I don't think are totally unreasonable. Look, the expectations for Michigan are kind of hard to draw up because there's a lot of new within this program. But look, if you're a Michigan fan that has high expectations for this football team in 2025, well, welcome to the club, because that's kind of where I've been at over the last couple of weeks. Dill, this episode is going to be so fun. This is our freaking childhood, man. Like, this is all we would do on the weekends. The boys were not super popular kids back in the day. And so this is how we spent our weekends. In fact, we went to Rome one summer, and that's all we talk about. We were walking the streets of Rome, talking Michigan football. Our dad turns around and is like, "Would you guys talk about something different when we're across the world?" It don't stop. And I'm excited to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, to the Michigan fans, appreciate you guys. Been a blast talking this program, going to be a blast talking this program. The amount of support y'all have shown the boys, whether it's spring practice, talking about the Bryce Underwood storylines, whether it's talking this program on the recruiting trail. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, without further ado, let's get into it. And let's start with one that seems kind of crazy on the surface, considering Michigan had neither in the 2024 year. 1,000-yard rusher, 1,000-yard receiver. I will give you the T-box. How are we feeling about this prediction?
In the 1,000-yard rusher probably has to happen, because this is a team that they didn't hit that 3,000-yard mark on the rushing total last season. It's a team that I kind of look at. I think that number probably needs to somehow be reached this season. And if that's going to happen, you got to think somebody comes close to that 1,000-yard mark, if not supersedes it.
If this does happen, Dill, that would be over half of our total offensive production coming from two players from last year. Like I don't think we got to 4,000 yards of total offense in the 2024 season. If this happens, half of that production is coming from two players on this roster. Here's the sticky part, or the sneaky part. Look, you have two really good running backs, and I'm just not really sure which one is going to be the bell cow. And I very well could see it be like Jordan Marshall around 750, could see Justice Haynes around 750. And Dill, I think Bryce Underwood is going to be utilized a lot in this rushing attack as well.
But I am not sure there's going to be a third guy really who gets any carries. So that's
true.
What I look for. Okay, well, I think they probably got to sniff that 3,000-yard mark. And that means, again, Bryce Underwood, who knows? I think he will be used a fair amount in the rushing
attack, agree,
given what we've seen from Chip Lindsey. I would really like to see when these backs, though, hit that 1,000-yard mark, because I think that would say we have a real sustained dominant rush.
Well, that's what you saw from Penn State last year. And look, this might require Michigan to be making a run in the college, give a few extra games for the boys. I think it's very reasonable, and I think it's really important. Look, if Michigan's trying to go into 2025 and just asking Bryce Underwood to put the offense on his back through the air, I don't think that's a good recipe. I think we're expecting this offensive line to take a step. I think it might be one of the most outside of the quarterback position. It might be the most upgraded position on this roster. I mean, these two, and it's not a shot at Caleb Mullins, it's not a shot at Donnie Edwards. That's just what we're hearing from these two, and Jordan Marshall and Justice Haynes, and really what we've seen from both of them. It hasn't been a ton, but when you watch Jordan Marshall, when you watch Justice Haynes, becomes pretty clear that this could be one of the best running back duos in the country. You feel good about getting a guy to an 1,000-yard rushing number. 1,000-yard receiver seems lofty, and I think it comes from one person, right? I think what we both look at is, hey, if there is a dominant wide receiver one in this offense, I think it's very clearly Donovan McCulley in 2024.
Unless they're just totally gaslighting us and somebody else is much better than they're kind of leading on.
They gaslit us about the quarterback situation last year, so I'm putting it by him.
About a lot of things, I'd say. But you look at what is kind of coming out, it sounds like everything's about Donovan McCulley. being like kind of almost head and shoulders the guy in this wide receiver room.
Yeah.
I mean, if he doesn't hit it, I don't really see who does. And again, he's never hit that mark in his career. So that is probably the one you kind of wonder about. Like, is it feasible? Do they have a guy who can really go out there and dominate in the way that you need to? Because 1,000 yards receiving is not easy, especially not on a team that wants to run the ball as much as
Yeah.
Michigan. So that's probably the one I doubt. If Donovan McCulley can hit 1,000, though, look
Dude,
out.
I think
Awesome.
I agree with that, and I think it's so important for him to be that wide receiver one, and then it kind of allows Freddie Moore to kind of slide into that wide receiver 2 role, which I think he can be really good at. Samaj Moore can kind of slide into that slot yards after the catch guy. Dill, I think a lot of targets are going to go to the tight ends too. In fact, I think this is a position that kind of flying under the radar. Like there's a lot of internal buzz around both Marlon Klein and then the boys. The boys love Hogan Hansen, especially as a pass catching tight end. Look, he might be a little bit of a ways away from being that dominant inline run blocker. He might be one of the best pure pass catchers on this team. My holdup with the 1,000-yard receiver is just that I don't know if Donovan McCulley is going to be the guy that gets 90 plus targets this year, because I look at a lot of guys getting involved in this Michigan passing attack. That's kind of historically, well, you go back and look at the Chip Lindsey offenses, you'll see a wide receiver one emerge if
But
that
that's the
guy's
big thing for Michigan. Like, the reason I think it was so spread out is you didn't have that hammer. Like, Michigan, I think,
agreed.
could really use a guy who is a bit of an alpha dog and a bit of a
Yeah.
difference maker. And it's got to be McCulley, it feels like.
All right, this one I love, and it's really one of my takes that my optimism around Michigan, it lies within this. Michigan will lead the Big Ten in sacks, that should have been plural, my fault, TFLs, and quarterback pressures. Essentially, Michigan going to have the best defensive line in the Big Ten in 2025. Dill, it feels like if Michigan is making the college football playoffs, and if Michigan is being one of those surprise teams that might be one of the best teams in the country in 2025, this needs to be true in 2025.
And I think this is like very feasible. Like, I look,
100%.
it'll probably be between Michigan, Penn State, and Oregon would be my guess, kind of
I,
just looking on it as afar.
I
But
agree.
I think Michigan's much more proven than Oregon is in the interior of their defensive line. And then Penn State's got 2 really good players, and then the rest of them I don't think you totally know much
Yeah.
about. This is I think, a really good unit. Again, it's going to be about, can they go probably 6 deep in the middle and 4 deep on the edge? Because I don't know that you have your Mason Grahams and your Kenny. I know you don't have those guys. Those
Not
guys
on the inside, but like we've been always saying, like I think Derek Moore's that guy. Like if we're talking about Derek Moore being a top 20 NFL draft pick, I wouldn't be all that surprised. I think he would have gone top 50 had he declared to the NFL draft this year. That's how good a football player I think he is. Here's my sneaky take here. This might have a little bit more to do with the secondary. Grasping the wink mark, because you look at the early portions of Michigan's defense last year, the secondary was leaky. Like the coverage wasn't all that sticky. The ball was coming out pretty dang quick. As the secondary got better, you saw Michigan start to dominate football games up front because they were given the time to get home. If this secondary can be arguably better than what it was in 2024, especially early in the season, I think you could see Michigan do this. And Dill, that's kind of, and this isn't like, I hate to bring Ohio State into this, but I'm freaking gonna. Like that's the biggest difference between these two teams. I think Michigan, they got question marks about Ohio State on the defensive line. I think this defensive line for Michigan can be elite, especially if you can kind of get the leash off of Jayshon Barham a little bit. He's a guy that I would expect 8 TFLs and 5+ sacks for. I think he had 4 TFLs and 1 sack last year. Can you get him going? Would be big in this conversation. All right, the last one. Michigan goes 9-3, but makes the college football playoffs. Now, couple of different conversations we have to have. You want to start with the 9-3, or do you want to start with them making the college football playoffs with a 9-3 record, which we didn't see from the committee last year?
Well, 9-3 is kind of got to be the target, I think. And frankly, I'm not sure that gets you in with this schedule. It's just not a brutal Big Ten schedule. You miss out on Penn State, you miss out on Oregon. I don't know. I mean, if USC and Nebraska are toss-ups, like that's probably not a playoff team, I guess.
I got to take. If Michigan goes 9-3, but the wins include Oklahoma on the road and Ohio State at the end of the year, I think there's a very good
You're
chance.
dropping some gross ones though, and I think they'd punish you for that. So
Yeah, that is true. Can I give my reasoning behind that? Because if you go on the road and beat Oklahoma, that kind of gives you the edge in like the head to head against the SEC. And chances are, look, if Michigan's trying to get in the college football playoffs with a 9-3 record, you're probably going up against another SEC team that has a 9-3 record. Having the head to head in the SEC on the road, I think would be really, really big. And then, Dill, if you beat Ohio State, you're probably going undefeated to the back half of the season, right? Washington, at Michigan State, Purdue, at Northwestern, at Maryland, at Ohio State. That's 6 straight wins. And so if Michigan, even if they have a little, and I think this is feasible. Like, yeah, I could see this Michigan team maybe not playing their best football early on in the season as we're kind of busting in a true freshman quarterback with a new offensive coordinator, trying to figure out who our difference makers are on the outside. But if Michigan plays the best football in the back half and then beats Ohio State in Ann Arbor to end the season, I think it'd be really hard to keep that. Like the reason Alabama didn't get into the playoffs last year is they lost to Oklahoma late in the season. The committee's looking at that and like, look, I ain't putting an Alabama team in that lost to a dead Oklahoma team last year. If Michigan can get hot late, beat Ohio State at the end of the year, even with the 9-3 record, which I do agree. Look, you're dropping an ugly one if you're winning Oklahoma and Ohio State. 10-2 is getting you in. 9-3, you're probably on the fringe, but I think that's what it would need to look like if Michigan does go 9-3.
yeah, no, and honestly, I think 10-2 has got to be the minimum. I think you look last year, kind of what you said is very what South Carolina sounded like a little bit, and it wasn't good enough. Like it just the numbers don't shake out that great if you lose
Well,
3 games.
can I ask you a question? Do you think the committee does what they did last year? Like they put SMU in the playoffs?
I think the fact that Indiana and SMU stunk and got boat raced is not going to help kind of the case for those. I don't want to say mid majors, but like kind of mid major
Weaker
teams.
teams that have better records. Yeah, I agree. I would guess the committee leans towards the better 9-3 football teams versus the ACC cakewalk 10-2 schedule, where it's like, look, outcast SMU's 10-2, they hadn't really beaten anybody real.
But look, I think the 9-3 is a moot point because frankly, 10-2 is super obtainable with
I
this schedule.
agree. I
Really,
agree.
like Oklahoma, we're kind of putting like on a bit of a pedestal. Oklahoma's got the same things Michigan's got in terms of questions about what they
Yeah,
can do. I think both teams defensively are a tough matchup for the opposing offense.
yeah,
USC and Nebraska, again, if Michigan's like losing 2 of those games,
yeah,
they're not a playoff team, I don't think, because
yeah.
those
I
two
agree with that.
aren't
All right,
loaded.
if Michigan goes 10-2, who are the losses to?
I mean, I don't know if we lose to Ohio State anymore, but like
We
would
don't.
it be Ohio State and maybe one of those 3 that you got
I
to
think
pick?
Oklahoma, Dill. As much as I'm fired up for that game, it's just the true freshman quarterback, first row start against not only Brent Venables' coach defense and a call D, he's going to call the plays for them this year. I think that defense is really legit, and I think if Michigan wants to win that football game, they gonna have to go on the road and run the football. I just don't know if I don't
Well,
feel great
that's
about.
going to dictate the season to me is if like the offensive line can be leaned on to gut games out because they just couldn't last year. They weren't
Yeah,
particularly great until the end of the year. So that really is going to be the decider. As much as we want to talk about Bryce Underwood and everyone else,
yeah.
this offensive line needs to be an engine, and they
Yeah,
weren't.
we're gonna learn real quick, and it's not like look if Michigan loses that game week 2, it's not like the season's over, right? Because I do think this is a roster, a football team that gets better as the year goes on. But I do think we'll learn about a couple of things. Like, hey, can we lean on this offensive line? We'll probably get a feel for, hey, can Bryce Underwood make those game changing plays? It ain't gonna be perfect. Like you're gonna see true, at least in my opinion. I hope we don't see it, but I think we'll see some true freshman mistakes. But can he be that guy that he's special? He can make special plays, game changing plays, plays that we didn't get from the quarterback position last year. That's kind of what you're hoping to learn from that road game against Oklahoma. I think you're right, dude. Really gettable. Those 3 road games in the first half of the year, the ones that you really have circled. You probably got to win 2 out of 3 of them. All right, we'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Might just run this episode back if y'all want to let some more fly in the comment section. We had a blast talking about this before we went live. Please let it fly. Appreciate you guys, and we gonna talk to y'all later. Peace.